Howdy, my name is Forrest, and I am a SQL Server nerd. I'm especially a fan of performance tuning, and within performance tuning, I'm super duper especially a fan of a tool called Query Store. It first shipped with version 2016, but it's also available with any of the Azure flavors of SQL Server. I'm too lazy to add special effects, but if I did, they would be something like Query Store descending from the sky with angels circling around and a heavenly voice going, "Oh!" Seriously, it's that good. So let me give you just an introduction to some of the things you can do with Query Store. Take a look. All right, so start with SSMS and expand the database you want to look at performance for. You should see Query Store in here. If you don't see it, either your version of SSMS is too old or Query Store hasn't been enabled for the database yet, and you need to send a very kind note to your DBA asking to turn it on. All right. Usually with Query Store, I begin with top resource consuming queries. Just double click it and wait for it to load. And this curve pattern is actually pretty common with a database that hasn't been tuned yet. Usually there are just a couple of queries that are taking the bulk of the load. Now, understanding Query Store also involves understanding the difference between duration and CPU. I'm going to have a video explaining more, but keep that in mind whenever you're looking through Query Store to find useful information. So the first thing I want to show is what's using my CPU. This is probably the most common reason I'm looking at Query Store. I see a database that's using up a lot of resources and I want to find out, hey, what's going on? So in order to do that, you can just hit this drop down and move it to CPU time. Notice how Query Store defaults to the last hour. If you want to change that, or pretty much change anything you're looking at, you can go to Configure. This is a really useful button, and if it's missing, it's probably because your window isn't large enough and it's hiding behind one of these drop-down arrows. I'm happy with the last hour looking at CPU time, and I can see it's primarily this query right here. I found my culprit. I can either tune this query or tell the developers not to run it so often. All right. Another common task with Query Store is trying to find timeouts that have occurred. Now, a timeout may have just been once or twice. You don't know that it's actually been using a lot of resources on the server. Here's how I look for it. I'm going to go to Configure, and I'm going to look for the last 12 hours of activity. I want to look farther back. I'm also going to change to duration, and instead of the total time, I'm going to be looking at the max time. And here we go. I see this query right here. It has this box here. It means that query was aborted. What a timeout is the application figuring out that a query is taking longer than acceptable to run and then telling the database to cancel that query. It'll show up as a box here. And the best way to find them is looking at max duration. Another interesting thing that you can see with Query Store, I'm going to switch back to CPU time here, look at some of these other queries. Here's a good one to look at. You can track queries. So here we have another count query. I'm going to hit this little crosshair button, and I get to see this query over time. And the really interesting thing here is that there are different plans. You can see the different colors of dots. Is that purple? I'm bad with colors. I think that's like a green, sort of. We'll call them purple and green. So tracking this over time, we see average duration, and we also see that this green one seems to be a little faster than the purple one. We can even see the different plans as we switch between them. All right, well, one of the cool things I can do as a DBA is select this faster green plan and force it. Going forward, SQL Server is going to start using this faster plan. Really helpful trick sometimes for fixing emergency performance issues. And yeah, that's just a little bit of what you can do with Query Store. Open it up, poke around, see what you can find. It's really useful.